Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jonathan Ahl. The world is remembering the Rwandan genocide from 25 years ago. From April to July of 1994, nearly 1 million people lost their lives as they were slaughtered during the Rwandan Civil War. The United Nations solemnizes the tragedy, among others, by marking June 26th as the UN Day in support of victims of torture. Locally, the Missouri Historical Society has partnered with the Bilingual International Assistance Services and the Holocaust Museum and Learning Center to create a program next week titled Triumph Over Darkness. That event will feature Marie Christine Williams, a survivor of the 1994 massacre. She's the author of The Dark Side of Human Nature and joins us in studio to share her story and reflections. Also joining me in studio is Ron Klutho, Refugee Services Coordinator for BIAS, the Bilingual International Assistance Services, based in South St. Louis. Ron and Marie Christine, thank you so much for joining me on the program.
Thank you so much for having us.
A note to listeners before we get going today, we may be discussing difficult topics, including genocide and sexual assault. So, Ron, this is the third time that this consortium of groups have gotten together to put on a program in honor of the UN Day of Support of Victims of Torture. What is the day all about? And maybe more importantly, why is it important to have a local acknowledgement of it in St. Louis?
June 26th was chosen as the United Nations Day in support of victims of torture because that's the anniversary in 1945 of when the United Nations Charter was signed, when it was established. And then also in 1987, the Convention Against Torture was established by the UN. So it was established as a day of recognition in 1997. And it is recognized all over the world. We recognize it in St. Louis, as you mentioned, for 3 years at the History Museum, before that at the Holocaust Museum, because we have a large population in St. Louis of survivors of torture, survivors of genocide. And we have found good partners in the History Museum and the Holocaust Museum, and the main purpose we do that is to let the larger community know that this has existed in the world, and we have survivors of those terrible things here in St. Louis.
And what do you hope that people get out of learning more about this and having a better understanding of what has happened around the world and how that is present here in our community?
Well, one of the things we suggest is that people get involved after the fact. We've got a list of agencies both here in St. Louis and in Rwanda that serve and assist survivors of torture and genocide, and we strongly encourage people to get involved. We also just want people to know about this having happened in the world. Unfortunately, it's probably going to happen again. So I think the more people know about it, maybe we can work towards eradicating it. That's the point of this June 26th day.
Marie Christine, your experience is nothing short of harrowing. What do you find in yourself when you choose to speak about it to groups the way that you have before and the way that you're planning to next week?
Actually, what my mission is today is by sharing my story, I believe that I can change someone's life. I feel like my story can help someone who is struggling, who is suffering, who is going through difficulties in life. So my story is mostly based on empower people in our communities.
So not just specifically to someone who has a shared experience like yours, but someone who's facing any kind of difficulty?
Anybody who's facing anything. You might be someone who just lost their loved ones. You might be somebody who had a very bad past and something that is very hard for you to forget. And so for me, my story is actually based on reminding people that if I made it and I survived and I found peace, you can do it too.
It's been 25 years since the massacre in Rwanda. Do you find that people remember? Do they understand? Do they have a vague recollection that there was that problem in that country they may never have heard of before news reports of the genocide started coming out?
Yeah, I just believe that most people they don't know what happened because Rwanda is the smallest country in the world, and it was actually even now we have probably the population is a little bit over 10 million, but in 1994 when the genocide began, Rwanda was on bottom. But, so my story, every time I share it, people ask me questions about, oh, how did you make it? How did you survive? What happened? We never heard about it. So I'm actually raising awareness about what happened, not only in Rwanda, in Europe, also when the Jews were attacked and massacred. And as you can see in my synopsis, my grandmother, she was also a Holocaust survivor. So I'm here actually representing, actually sharing awareness about what happened so we can actually stop, change the world.
You mentioned your grandmother, a Holocaust survivor. How much did she talk to you about that? How much knowledge did you know of her experience?
So when I was a younger girl, she raised me until I turned age 7. And the time she used to tell me, my life was bad. I had a very bad childhood. The reason she shared her stories with me and her past and her childhood, it was because my father and my mother they didn't want me, so they abandoned me. So for her to lift me up, she used her story, her childhood, and the things she went through to actually help me understand that I am loved. So I remember one time telling me that, oh, when I was a young girl, I lost my entire family through Holocaust. We were taken to the camp and I watched my father getting hung. So I never understood until 1994.
Do you think you could have survived what you had gone through had it not been for the lessons that your grandmother taught you?
No, I just believe that every time I was struggling and running for my life in 1994, I always remember that if I can fight for what I want in life, I can survive this. I can make it. So my grandmother gave me a gift of believing in myself.
Your book is called The Dark Side of Human Nature, and you've seen the darkest of human nature. Do you still believe in goodness and kindness after everything that you've seen and been through?
In the beginning, after Rwandan genocide, I didn't believe in anyone. I didn't trust people. But after 20 years of trying to find peace, I finally believe that I'm doing better than I ever been before. I found peace. I now trust people. I believe them. And you have to remember that someone like me who went through a lot of struggle, sometimes we become harder to other people. And I don't want my past to be a burden to other people. I want my past to be something that they can remember and think about, and something they never want to happen to them. I want them to see me as somebody who survived, to share a story, and to empower the ones in need.
Ron, the idea of wide-scale genocide unfortunately doesn't seem to be going anywhere. I think that with the Holocaust was the first time that the world became aware of a genocide because of the size and scope of World War II and the presence of cameras and reporters to tell these stories. But since then, there was the genocide in Cambodia, in Rwanda, in Bosnia, in Darfur. Is these moments where people decide that a whole group of people should just be slaughtered simply because of who they are, is that just part of human nature that's never going to go away?
I'm afraid so. I hope not. But what I've learned in meeting people from these countries and reading about it is that one of the tools is propaganda and dehumanizing the quote-unquote other. In the case of Rwanda, the Hutus would refer to the Tutsis as cockroaches and snakes and vermin that needed to be eradicated for the health of the larger community. That's the same kind of language that was used in the Holocaust, that was used in Bosnia. Slightly different terms, but they were still dehumanized. So we see that with the people we serve at Bilingual International every day. You name the country that people are refugees from, and there's a version of some type of dehumanizing language that really, when it's drummed into people's heads over and over again, along with economic problems, political problems, is a recipe for disaster. During the genocide in Rwanda, there was a radio station that I think Christine can attest to this, constantly telling people to go out and kill. And in the case of Rwanda, it was colonized by Germany and then later Belgium, and these colonizing powers used relatively minor ethnic differences to set these groups against each other, the idea of divide and conquer. And so that started a lot of resentment among the Hutus because the Tutsis were the favored population by the Belgians. Later, when the country became independent in 1962, because the Hutus were a majority, they got power, and they really used that against the Tutsis with years of resentment. And actually, the Belgians, before independence, threw their power away from the Tutsis towards the Hutus because they were desperate to keep the country, and they thought that the Tutsis were better organized to get to independence. And so outside powers, in this case and other countries too, used propaganda and hate speech, because in Rwanda, just as in Bosnia, the people lived in peace. There were a lot of intermarriage for most of history until political opportunists came in, outside powers came in, or economic problems, and that led to disaster.
It's hard enough to get people to pay attention to what goes on in torture and murder around the world when you can tie it to a very specific and organized genocide. But your group also works with people that are victims of these things in countries where there may not be, there's obviously horrible things going on, but not as organized of a genocide and hurting people, places like Syria, Afghanistan, the Congo, Iraq. How do you get the average person to care about what's going on the other side of the world, to the point where they may do something about it? How much can we do about it when we live here in the middle of the U.S.?
For me, it makes a big difference when I actually meet somebody from those countries. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think I mentioned to you before we went on the air that the first year we did this at the History Museum, we had a panel of 4 people that we had assisted from 4 different countries who shared their stories. We had one from Angola, one from Bosnia, one from Burma, and one from Afghanistan. And they shared their personal stories, and you could have heard a pin drop in the auditorium. The people in the audience, some of them were not familiar with the stories of those countries, but just I think the human connection made people want to at least learn more or get involved or do something.
Marie-Christine, the event next week includes a question and answer session, especially when you tell your story, being shot, being hurt, the surgeries that you've gone through. What do people want to know? What do they ask you?
Actually, every time I do an event, the first 5 questions I always get from people is like, how you made it? How did you survive? How can you be there and smiling and trying to have a normal life? And every time I get those questions, I always have different answers for them. If you're struggling, accept your past. Accept what happened to you so you can once you accept it, so you can actually move on. Because if you're hiding your past, you're burying your past in your heart, in it deep in you, and you don't want to share it, and you don't get help, and you don't want to actually to try to work on it and accept it, you will never move on. That's me. Like 20 years ago, I'm in a different place today than I was 20 years ago. So I remember, like after genocide, when I was still 14, I'm laying in the bed and I'm very, very angry. I could not believe I survived. I couldn't feel my feet. I had wounds all over me, including machetes, and the memories were gone. All I had in me was anger. But after so many years from being angry and refusing to accept my past, I got tired of it. I have accepted, yes, I survived the Rwandan genocide. Yes, I was molested as a child. Yes, I watched people dying. And I struggled to find food and find a place to sleep in the 100 days of my journey. It took a lot of work for me to be where I am. It took me a lot of work to accept that, okay, yes, it's the past. What now I'm doing next? What I'm doing to actually move forward and actually find the peace. Here I am today. I'm the happiest person.
The hope, joy, moving on, acceptance, those are great messages. Don't you want people to be angry, though, that this kind of thing could happen? It's happened since your struggle, and it will very well likely happen again. Don't you want people to be angry about that part of it, though?
No, I actually want people to change their behaviors. I want people to accept each other for who they are. I want people to believe in each other. I want people to actually come together as a community and actually believe in making positive changes in the communities. Because if I can change, you change, actually, we can actually change the world together as a community. Some people believe that they don't have power to change what happened, but yes, they do. As an example, Ron was talking about the propaganda in Rwanda, how they brainwashed people, how they told them to hate each other, that if you're short, you must be Hutu, if you're tall and skinny and, slender, you must be Tutsi. You know what? They brainwashed them. Is no such thing of if you're short, you're Hutu, or if you're tall, you're Tutsi. Because you know what? I have met people who looks more like Tutsis than I am. And who's Hutu? That's why I always tell people that if you're going to judge me, I want you to judge me by my behaviors. I want you to judge me by the way I treat you. Because if you're going to judge me by the color of my skin, or how tall or how short I am, is not right. So I just want people to actually accept that people are different and accept to live together. That's my message. That's my hope.
How do you react then when you see in the news groups of people being marginalized, people being the victims of propaganda? Those same kinds of things you talked about happen in the United States. They happen in other countries. How does it feel when you see that happening, something that was a precursor to genocide, really, in your country?
Okay, for me, I just believe that, those countries, I can go on and on with names and of the countries that are struggling right now. But you know what? All those people who's getting killed, I feel bad for them. And sometimes my memories comes back and I feel so bad that we're in 2019 and we can't really find a way to actually work together. We can't find a way to stop it, and the governments, they have the power to step in and actually get help. They have power to step in and tell the citizens, this is not our country should be running. Our country should be running by our values, not by hate, That's not the way you bring community together, by killing a neighbor or by killing someone because different than you. So it makes me sad.
Ron, ultimately, isn't it governments that can stop genocide? And does it then the focus for average people to make sure that their governments, both nationally and part of international communities, stand up to this and say, at the first sign of something has to be done?
Yes, and I think a lot of governments, a lot of national governments refuse to call what happened in Rwanda a genocide, because if they did, they would have been forced to intercede, to act, because most of the countries signed off on the Convention Against Genocide, and so there was a lot of dithering in international communities. There was a in fact, a United States State Department official in 94 during the genocide who was at a press conference, and reporters were trying to get her to admit that it was a genocide, and she was it was painful to watch. She was dancing around the word, saying that acts of genocide occurred, but it was not genocide. So, yeah, I think a lot of countries are unwilling or unable to intercede, but most of the countries have made a vow to not let this happen again.
The event is Triumph Over Darkness. It is 6:30 Wednesday, the 26th, at the Lee Auditorium. And more information on that is available on our website, stlpublicradio.org. Author and survivor Marie Christine Williams and Ron Klutho with Bilingual International Assistance Services, thank you both very much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer, St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on The Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.